Okay, 5.4 problem number 10 says, some foreign emissaries are people without diplomatic immunity, so some people invulnerable to arrest and prosecution are foreign emissaries because no people with diplomatic immunity are people vulnerable to arrest and prosecution. Again, a lot of words, hard to kind of make sense. You've got a bunch of sentences all combined into one big, clumsy, long sentence. So I've got to figure out a way to make my work much more manageable so that I can evaluate this argument for validity, and I'm going to do that by simplifying it. And I'm always going to begin this process in the same way, and that is I'm going to look to see if I can figure out what the conclusion is. If I can figure out what the conclusion is, life becomes a lot easier for me and I can start to do other things. Now, I'm going to identify the conclusion by looking for conclusion and premise indicator words. Words like because and since or for the reason that tell me that whatever follows is a premise. And words like consequently, thus, hence, therefore tells me that a conclusion is going to follow. So why don't you go ahead and pause the video, look back at this mishmash of words here, and see if you can locate any indicator words that help you identify the conclusion. And once you think you've figured out what the conclusion is, go ahead and restart the video. Okay. I see a couple of things here that are important. I see the word so. So is a conclusion indicator, right? Because so is saying, hey, I've just told you something, so this must be true, or therefore this must be true. And I also see the word because, and that tells me the premise is going to follow. So I've identified what my conclusion is. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and write this conclusion out as a single statement, and the conclusion here is some people invulnerable to arrest and prosecution are foreign emissaries. And then I want to locate the predicate term of that statement. And I know that that predicate term is the major term of the argument. And it's going to appear one more time in this argument, and it's going to appear in the first premise. So when I locate people, let's see, some people invulnerable to arrest, or I'm sorry, when I locate foreign emissaries in one of the other premises, I know that that's my first premise, and then the other sentence is going to be my second premise. So then I can get them all kind of arranged like this, with my two premises followed by my conclusion, okay? And I know that my first premise is some foreign emissaries are people without diplomatic immunity. My second premise is no people with diplomatic immunity are people vulnerable to arrest and prosecution. And then there's my conclusion. So this is starting to look a little bit more familiar to me. What I need to do now, though, is I need to figure out what my categories of countable things are, okay? And in this case, I've got three countable categories of things, but some of them appear a little bit differently. So I want to be mindful of that because the difference here is important. So I've got foreign emissaries appearing the same way twice. So I'm just going to go ahead and use F to refer to foreign emissaries. And then I've got people vulnerable to arrest and prosecution and people invulnerable. Okay, so I've got to keep my eye out because those two things are different. What's really going on here is when I refer to people invulnerable to arrest and prosecution, I'm really referring to something like non-people vulnerable to arrest and prosecution. In other words, these are term complements of one another. If I took people vulnerable to arrest and prosecution and people invulnerable and I added them all together, I'd have all people. Okay, so people invulnerable and people vulnerable are the term complements. So I'm always going to I'm going to use V to refer to people vulnerable to arrest and prosecution. And then when I want to say people invulnerable, I'm just going to say non-V. And then similarly, people with diplomatic immunity and people without diplomatic immunity, I'm just going to go ahead and use D for that. And when I want to say people with diplomatic immunity, I'm just going to write D. And when I want to say people without diplomatic immunity, I'm going to write non-D. What I'm looking for is to get the argument broken down into symbols like this, because this starts to look much more manageable, much easier to work with. So I have no D or V, some F are non-D, and some non-V are F. Okay, so now I'm getting closer to being able to work with this, but I need to get rid of those nons. I need to have each one of those terms appear the exact same way each time it appears. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep my first premise the same because there's no problem there. But that second premise is a problem because I've got non-D. So I have to use my rules of conversion, obversion, or contraposition to see if I can get rid of that non-D. This is where my 4.4 handout should come in fairly handy. 4.4 tells me how I can use conversion, obversion, and contraposition, and it tells me how to use them. So why don't you go ahead and pause the video and see if by using conversion, obversion, or contraposition, you can get rid of non-D in that second premise. And when you're ready to go, start the video again. Okay, so hopefully what you realize is you can avert that second premise. And if you do that, you change its quality, but not its quantity. Okay, so the second premise, as it's written, is an affirmative premise, and it's particular. So you want to change its quality from affirmative to negative, but keep it particular, which means you're going to turn it into an O claim, a some are not statement. So I'm going to change some F are non-D to some F are not non-D, and then I'm going to do the second step of inversion, which is I'm going to change the predicate term to its term complement, and the term complement of non-D is D. So now I've got my premises kind of cleaned up, but I've got this goofy conclusion, some non-V or F. So I've got to figure out a way to get rid of that non-V. Now, the challenge here is I'm not going to be able to apply just conversion, just aversion, or just contraposition to this conclusion to get rid of non-V. I'm going to have to apply two of those rules, and I have to make sure I apply them in the right order. Okay, so will you go ahead and pause the video and see which of those two rules would allow you to get rid of non-V and what you would have as a result of applying those two rules. And when you're ready to go, restart the video. Okay, so hopefully what you realized is you've got to convert this guy and then you've got to invert it. Okay, so if I convert this some non-V or F, I'm going to get some F or non-V. And then when I invert that statement, I'm going to get some F are not V. Okay, now my argument looks pretty good. It's ready to go. I've got three terms. They appear exactly the same way 2 times each. My major term is in the first premise. My minor term is in the second premise. And I can go ahead and start to apply the 5 rules of categorical syllogisms. And I know that if I break any one of these rules, the argument's invalid. But if I don't break any of the 5 rules, it's a valid argument. And what that means is that if those premises turn out to be true, that conclusion will also have to be true. So the first rule says that the middle term has to be distributed at least one time. And in this argument, the middle term is D. That's the term that appears in both the premises, but not the conclusion. The first premise is an E statement, and it distributes both its subject and its predicate. And the second premise is an O statement, and O statements distribute their predicates. So D is actually distributed in both premises. So I have passed rule number 1. Rule number 2 says if there's any term in the conclusion that's distributed, it has to also be distributed in a premise. And the conclusion is an O statement. So it's distributing its predicate term V. So V needs to be distributed also in one of the premises. And in the first premise where V appears, it's distributed because E claims distribute both their subjects and their predicates. So I've passed the first 2 rules. The third rule says I'm not allowed to have 2 negative premises. And here's where I've run into a problem. Because the first premise is an E statement, which is negative. The second premise is an O statement, which is negative. And I've just broken the third rule, exclusive premises. Okay, so now if I wanted to check my work, I could come over here to my Venn diagram and know that if I can diagram in the premises here and not see that the conclusion is also true, then I will have proven that this argument is invalid. So I'm always going to begin with the universal premise first, no D or V. So if I wanted to show that no D's or V's, I'd have to blank out, I'd have to mark out, turn out the lights on any place in my Venn diagram where there could be D's that are also V's. And that's areas 3 and 4 right here. Area 3 and 4 is where there would be D's that are also V's. So if the statement no D's or V's is true, there couldn't be anything here. So I'd have to get rid of this. Turn out the lights where all the D and V's overlap, because no D's or V's. All right, so now I go to my second premise. Some F are not D. And then because it's a some or not statement, I know I'm going to mark an X somewhere. I only get one X, okay? So some or not tells me there's going to be an X somewhere. So I want to mark an X that would show you an F that is not also a D. So if I put an X right here in 2, that would be an F that's actually also a D. So I know I'm not going to be putting any X in area 2 because I'm trying to show that some F are not D. And an X in 2 would show an F that is a D. Now in area 5, if I put an X here, that would be an F that would not be a D, right? Because the D circle ends right here below area 2. But I could also put an X in area 6. That would also be an F that's not a D. And when I don't have any reason for choosing one area over the other, when there's 2 possible areas, I have to put that X right on the line. And I know that anytime I have an X on the line, I've got a problem. So I've demonstrated that this argument is an invalid argument. The particular fallacy is exclusive premises, and my Venn diagram confirms that.